Welcome to our channel. Let's begin the journey.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're actually stepping past the control room and venturing into the fascinating, largely hidden afterlife of nuclear fuel. You know, when we think about nuclear power, we usually just picture the massive output of clean energy. But there's this whole second act to this story, known as the back end of the nuclear life cycle. And let me tell you, it is an absolute masterclass in physics and engineering, dealing entirely with spent fuel and reprocessing. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the illusion of shutdown, the decay heat problem, breeding plutonium-239, spent fuel pools, and finally, dry casks and beyond. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the illusion of shutdown.
Look at the sheer, massive scale of these facilities. It's breathtaking. With conventional machinery or even a traditional coal plant, when you want to kill the power, you just cut the fuel supply, hit a switch, and the whole machine eventually goes cold. But a nuclear reactor? Totally different beast. Turning it off isn't like simply flipping a switch on your living room wall.
Think about your kitchen oven for a second. You turn it off, and yeah, it stays hot for a bit just from the trapped heat. Well, a nuclear reactor is kind of like the ultimate overachiever here. Shutting down the actual fission chain reaction doesn't mean the heat generation just magically stops. The reactor literally keeps generating its own residual heat from within, totally independent of the main fission process.
Which brings us to Section 2, the decay heat problem.
The physics going on here are just fascinating. See, during active fission, you get a total of about 200 mega-electron volts of energy released per fission event. But here's the kicker. Roughly 14 mega-electron volts of that total energy is delayed. It doesn't come out right away. Instead, it's released later on as the unstable fission products left behind undergo radioactive decay. This continuous, completely unavoidable release of energy after shutdown is exactly what we call decay heat.
And to put that into perspective, the numbers are absolutely staggering. Imagine a 3,000 megawatt thermal reactor. Just one single second after the chain reaction is stopped, it is still pumping out 185 megawatts of heat. Fast forward a full day, and it's doing 13 megawatts. Even an entire month after being completely officially shut down, that core is still generating 4 megawatts of heat. I mean, that's enough energy to boil massive amounts of water just sitting right there.
If we trace the decay curve, you'll see two distinct phases. Right after shutdown, boom, there's a very rapid drop. That's the short-lived fission products dying off quickly. But then, notice how that downward trend drastically slows down and flattens out into this really long, stubborn tail. That tail is caused by the slow decay of long-lived radioactive nuclides. So, the longer the reactor ran before you shut it down, the more of those long-lived nuclides built up, and the slower that heat actually dissipates.
So why is understanding this absolutely crucial? Well, if those specialized decay heat removal systems happen to fail, all that residual heat is just going to build up, trapped right inside the core. The temperature of the fuel would rise uncontrollably, leading to severe damage, or literally, and I mean literally, the fuel melting itself. That's exactly why decay heat represents one of the single most serious safety issues in all of nuclear engineering. The cooling basically can never stop.
Moving right along to Section 3, breeding plutonium-239.
Now, inside the fuel of a nuclear plant, the highly reactive uranium-235 does most of the heavy lifting for the main fission process. But over 95% of the uranium in that fuel is actually the heavier, more stable isotope uranium-238. And because there is just so much of it, this uranium-238 acts kind of like a giant catcher's mitt. It sits right in the middle of this massive neutron flux and constantly captures stray, radiative neutrons that are flying around the core. This kicks off a pretty amazing step-by-step process of literal nuclear alchemy. When uranium-238 catches a neutron, it becomes uranium-239. But that new isotope is highly unstable. Within about 23.5 minutes, it undergoes beta decay, transmuting it to neptunium-239. Then, roughly 2.5 days later, that neptunium undergoes another beta decay. The final result of all this? Plutonium-239, a completely transuranic element that basically does not exist in nature. And here is why this is an absolute game changer. Just like uranium-235, plutonium-239 is highly fissile. So simply by operating normally, the reactor has essentially bred brand new nuclear fuel right inside the old fuel rods. Because of this, spent fuel isn't just waste, it's practically an untapped energy mine. Through nuclear reprocessing, we can actually chemically extract this newly formed plutonium from the spent rods and then use it as fresh fuel in other reactors. How cool is that?
Okay, Section 4, spent fuel pools. Inside a typical light water reactor, cores are usually reloaded in batches. Your average fuel assembly is going to stay inside the active core for about 3 operating cycles. That roughly translates to 4.5 years of continuous extreme conditions. They're finally pulled out when their excess reactivity is totally depleted, which is basically just when they can't efficiently sustain the chain reaction anymore.
So once they come out, the crucial number to remember is 5. That is the absolute minimum number of years this spent fuel must sit submerged deep underwater in a specialized spent fuel pit just to cool down. Remember that decay heat we were just talking about? Yeah, it is still raging inside those rods. So the water does 2 vital things for us. It continuously removes that decay heat, and it acts as an impenetrable shield against the really intense radiation. But you definitely can't just toss the fuel rods into the pool randomly. Because the spent fuel still contains fissile materials, like the leftover uranium-235 and our newly bred plutonium-239, the actual physical geometry in these pools has to be meticulously planned. The assemblies are very carefully spaced out to make 100% sure the fuel doesn't accidentally achieve criticality and restart a chain reaction right there underwater. That would be bad. Which naturally brings up a very practical question for us to ponder. As the years tick by and more batches of fuel are swapped out, these massive indoor pools are eventually going to start running out of space. So what exactly is the next step in the journey when that underwater real estate is completely spoken for?
That brings us to Section 5, dry casks and beyond.
Now, once the spent fuel elements have sat in the pool for many years, becoming the oldest and, relatively speaking, the coolest assemblies in the whole facility, their decay heat finally drops to a manageable level. Only then can they safely leave the water. They're transferred into these massive, robust steel and concrete containers known as dry casks. These casks rely entirely on passive air cooling. No pumps, no moving parts. Just the natural circulation of the air to keep them safe as they sit out on secure outdoor concrete pads. What we've looked at today really redefines how we understand nuclear power, doesn't it? From managing a slow, decade-long cool-down of decay heat to handling the spontaneous creation of transuranic elements like plutonium for reprocessing, the back end is truly a masterclass in long-term chemical, thermal, and engineering management. And you know those dry casks? They aren't the final stop. Ultimately, this material is destined for deep geologic isolation, securely entombed deep within the Earth's bedrock. Shutting down the primary chain reaction is literally just the opening chapter of the fuel's afterlife.
As the saying goes, a reactor's job doesn't end when the chain reaction stops. It's a relentless, decades-long commitment to thermal and radiological safety. It really forces us to ask, as we continue to push towards a clean energy future, how will our generation's mastery of the back end and deep geologic isolation define our legacy thousands of years from now? Something to think about, keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.
The view from here is breathtaking. Command, we are in position and ready for the next phase. If you liked the video, subscribe and comment the topic you want next. Thanks for watching, and stay unstoppable.